A lot of people will tell you Charles and Camilla's story is a love story. Star-crossed lovers kept apart by circumstance, romantic even. Let's call it what it actually was. A married man cheating on his wife while she struggled alone in a palace that never wanted her. And everyone knew it. The staff knew. The protection officers knew. The aristocratic friends who hosted their country house weekends knew. For years, the only people who didn't officially know were you and me, the public paying for the whole operation. So here's what I want to do. I want to lay out the facts, specific dates, direct quotes, the actual timeline, and then I want you to decide whether love story is really the right word for what happened. Charles met Camilla Shand in 1970 or early 1971, depending on which account you trust. Most sources place it at a polo field in Windsor Great Park. She was confident, funny, aristocratic. And she made the first move with a line that tells you everything about how this would end. My great-grandmother was your great-great-grandfather's mistress. So how about it? She wasn't joking. Her great-grandmother was Alice Keppel, the famous mistress of King Edward VII. In one sentence, Camilla had established what she might one day become. History repeating itself. Just with phone taps this time. Charles was smitten immediately. Here was a woman who didn't treat him like a prince to be handled carefully. She teased him. She challenged him. They started dating. But here's where it gets complicated. Charles had to serve 8 months in the Royal Navy. When he came back in 1973, Camilla had gotten engaged to Andrew Parker Bowles, a cavalry officer she'd known for years. They married in July 1973. Charles attended the wedding and looked, by multiple accounts, visibly despondent. Now, the question that haunts this entire story is whether Charles simply lost her through bad timing, or whether the palace actively pushed her away. According to biographer Jonathan Dimbleby, who was granted extensive access to Charles for his 1994 authorized biography, Lord Mountbatten's influence in steering Charles away from Camilla was substantial. Mountbatten allegedly believed she wasn't suitable as a royal bride. The future king needed someone with an unblemished reputation. Translation, a virgin. And Camilla wasn't that. She was experienced, confident, already romantically entangled. She didn't fit the mold. So the palace machinery churned forward without her, and Camilla married Andrew Parker Bowles and settled into the life of an upper-class army wife. She had 2 children, Tom in 1974 and Laura in 1978. By all appearances, she had moved on. Except she hadn't. Not really. This is where Diana enters. Lady Diana Spencer, 19 years old when the courtship began in earnest in 1980. Young, aristocratic, Protestant, and, though no one said it out loud, sexually inexperienced. She checked every box on the palace's medieval checklist. Diana later said she and Charles had approximately 13 meetings before he proposed. 13. In recorded tapes she made for Andrew Morton's 1992 biography, Diana, Her True Story, she admitted she barely knew the man she was about to marry. What she did know, even before the wedding, was that Camilla Parker Bowles remained a significant presence in his life. Weeks before the July 29, 1981 wedding, watched by an estimated 750 million people worldwide, Diana found a bracelet on Charles's desk, a gold chain engraved with the letters G and F. Gladys and Fred, Charles and Camilla's pet names for each other. When Diana confronted him about it, Charles insisted it was merely a farewell gift for an old friend. According to Morton's book, based on Diana's own recorded testimony, she didn't believe him then. She was right not to. Diana would later describe her wedding day as the worst day of my life. In a PBS documentary, she recalled spending the ceremony scanning the congregation for Camilla's face. She found it. Camilla's distinctive pale gray pillbox hat. Diana walked down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral, knowing she wasn't marrying a man who was fully available to her. And Camilla was there, watching. In the congregation at a wedding she arguably should never have attended. The honeymoon should have been the beginning of their life together. It became Diana's first real education in the nature of her marriage. According to the Morton tapes, she discovered Charles had brought photographs of Camilla with him on their honeymoon, on the royal yacht Britannia. During a formal dinner, Diana noticed her new husband was wearing cufflinks engraved with two intertwined C's, a gift from Camilla, to wear on his honeymoon, with his new wife. When Diana asked about them, Charles dismissed her concerns. "It was as if I had married a man who was still in love with someone else," Diana stated in the Morton recordings, "because I had." And that engagement interview, February 24th, 1981. You've probably seen the clip. When asked if they were in love, Diana responded immediately, "Of course." Charles paused, then added, "Whatever in love means." At the time, it seemed like philosophical musing from a thoughtful prince. In retrospect, as Diana herself noted, it was a warning she failed to heed. Here's the thing about the affair. The actual affair. Historians and royal biographers generally agree it resumed around 1986, approximately 5 years into the marriage. Both Charles and Camilla were married to other people, both had children, and both conducted their relationship with remarkable openness within the aristocratic circles that enabled it. The logistics were almost elegant in their efficiency. Camilla lived at Middlewick House in Wiltshire, conveniently close to Highgrove, Charles's country estate in Gloucestershire. Before that, she'd been at Bull Hyde Manor, equally accessible. The geography wasn't accidental. Charles could visit Camilla, or she could visit him, without the drive appearing suspicious on any diary. Just neighbors in the country, checking in on each other. The social infrastructure was equally helpful. Country house weekends hosted by loyal friends provided cover. The Van Cutsums, Hugh and Emily, were particularly useful, their estate offering a neutral ground where Charles and Camilla could be together, without it being Charles visiting Camilla. Other aristocratic families in the so-called Highgrove set played similar roles. These were people who understood discretion as a class obligation. They'd been keeping each other's secrets for generations. What was one more affair among the gentry? The staff knew everything. Royal protection officers, valets, household managers, they all saw Camilla coming and going. They saw the phone calls, the gifts, the locked bedroom doors. According to multiple accounts, there was an understanding. You saw nothing. Your job was to facilitate, not to judge. And certainly not to tell the princess. Meanwhile, Andrew Parker Bowles maintained his own extramarital relationships, including a long-rumored involvement with Princess Anne. The Parker-Bowles marriage was less a union than an arrangement, an aristocratic convenience that provided social cover for both parties. Camilla had respectability as a married woman, Andrew had freedom, and Charles had access. Diana, meanwhile, was increasingly isolated. She'd given birth to Prince William in 1982 and Prince Harry in 1984, fulfilling her primary royal function of producing an heir and a spare. That's not my phrase. That's actually how they describe it. But her marriage had become a performance. In her testimony to Morton, Diana described the period as one of profound loneliness. Trapped in the gilded cage of Kensington Palace, while her husband found emotional and physical intimacy elsewhere. And this is where I need to be specific about what isolation actually meant. Diana stated that her bulimia began shortly after her engagement. In the Morton tapes and the Panorama interview, she described the binge purge cycles with clinical precision, sometimes multiple episodes in a single day. She spoke of vomiting so frequently that the blood vessels in her eyes would burst. Her waist measurement fluctuated so dramatically in the weeks before her wedding that her dress required repeated alterations. According to Diana's account, the palace's response was dismissive. Royal life proceeded according to schedule. There was no accommodation for psychological crisis. The isolation was architectural as much as emotional. Kensington Palace sounds grand. In practice, it meant long hours alone while Charles was elsewhere, at Highgrove, his country estate, where Camilla could visit without scrutiny, or on official engagements where Diana's role was decorative. According to Paul Burrell, Diana's butler, who later wrote a memoir about his time with her, staff loyalty ran to the institution, not to the individual princess. Diana told Morton that she discovered her phone calls were monitored, her movements tracked, and her concerns reported up the chain to senior royals, who viewed her as a problem to be managed, not a person to be helped. A problem. The contrast with Charles's experience couldn't have been starker. While Diana was isolated, Charles had Camilla, a woman he could confide in completely. He had his country estate, his circle of loyal friends, his causes, his structure. Diana had her boys, whom she loved fiercely, and increasingly little else. When she began to fight back, to build her own public profile through charity work, particularly her groundbreaking advocacy for AIDS patients and landmine victims, it was perceived within the palace not as admirable independence, but as dangerous freelancing. According to multiple royal biographers, including Penny Junor and Tina Brown, the term loose cannon was used within palace circles to describe Diana's public activities. Loose cannon. The woman visiting dying AIDS patients and holding their hands when the rest of the world was terrified to touch them. That was the problem. But the affair might have continued indefinitely as an open secret among the elite, if not for technological accidents that would expose everything. On December 18, 1989, an amateur radio enthusiast in Oxfordshire named Cyril Reenan picked up a mobile phone transmission while scanning frequencies with his radio scanner. What he recorded was a late-night conversation between the Prince of Wales and Camilla Parker Bowles. The transcript wouldn't be published until January 1993. When it was, it became known as Tampon Gate. I'm going to tell you what was on that tape, because you need to understand why the public reaction was so visceral. The 6-minute recording captured Charles and Camilla in conversation of startling intimacy. The exchange that gave the scandal its name came when Charles, expressing his wish to be close to Camilla always, mused that he might be reincarnated as her tampon. Or a box of Tampax, he added. Just to be chucked down the lavatory and go on and on forever, round and round. Camilla laughed audibly. I want you to sit with that for a second. The heir to the throne, in his 40s, saying this to his married mistress, while his wife, whom he'd made miserable for years, was presumably alone somewhere in another wing of another palace. A Maury poll conducted immediately after publication showed that 68% of respondents believed Charles had damaged his ability to be king. The word that appeared again and again in letters to newspapers and in Vox Pop interviews was pathetic. Pathetic. That's not my editorializing. That was the public verdict. And I think they were right to say it. The recording also revealed the mechanics of their affair. They discussed their next meeting, the logistics of avoiding detection, the codes they used. This wasn't a brief lapse in judgment. This was an organized, ongoing betrayal of the woman Charles had married and the institution he was meant to represent. And Camilla? The recording showed her as a willing, active participant. She wasn't some passive recipient of royal attention. She was coordinating meetings, using code names, laughing at the absurdity of their situation. The other woman narrative sometimes paints mistresses as victims of powerful men. Camilla was no victim. She was an architect. For Diana, the public revelation was both vindication and humiliation. Her private pain was now public property. But it also gave her something she hadn't had before, the sympathy of a nation that finally understood what she'd been enduring. What followed was open warfare. The years between 1992 and 1996 became known as the War of the Waleses, a vicious, leaking, briefing and counter-briefing media battle between two royal households that were supposed to be one family. Andrew Morton's book had blown the doors open. Now both sides fought to control the narrative. Charles's team struck back in 1994. Jonathan Dimbleby's authorized biography, paired with a 2.5-hour documentary that aired on ITV in June, was Charles's attempt to tell his side. The prince had granted unprecedented access. He wanted to be seen as thoughtful, dutiful, misunderstood. Instead, he created a different kind of scandal. In the documentary, Dimbleby asked Charles directly whether he had been faithful to Diana. Charles paused, and then he said yes, but only until the marriage had irretrievably broken down. He'd just admitted adultery on national television to 20 million viewers as the heir to the throne. The immediate reaction was shock, not because anyone was surprised he'd cheated. The Tampon Gate tape had already established that, but because he'd said it out loud, on camera, for the record. The Daily Mirror's headline the next day captured the mood: "Not fit to reign." Polls showed a majority of the public agreeing. Charles's defense, that the affair only resumed after the marriage was over in all but name, was immediately contested. Diana didn't buy it. The timeline of the Tampon Gate recording, made in December 1989, didn't support it either. In 1989, Diana was still trying. She was still in the marriage. She was still purging in palace bathrooms and hoping things might improve. But here's what was most revealing about the Dimbleby project. Charles wasn't just defending himself. He was blaming others. The biography painted a picture of a prince emotionally damaged by cold parents, particularly by a distant father who never told him he loved him. It suggested Charles had been pushed into marrying Diana by palace pressure when his heart belonged elsewhere. The subtext was clear. It wasn't his fault. He was a victim too. Diana's response came the following year, November 20th, 1995. She sat down with Martin Bashir for a BBC Panorama interview that would detonate like a bomb in the heart of the British establishment. Nearly 23 million viewers in the UK alone, a record for a current affairs program. And Diana delivered the line that would define her story. When Bashir asked about Camilla Parker Bowles, Diana paused, looked directly at the camera, and said, "Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." The simplicity of it, the restrained understatement concealing years of anguish. In a single sentence, she'd told the truth everyone suspected, but the palace had never acknowledged. She spoke about her bulimia. "It was a symptom of what was going on in my marriage. I was crying out for help, but giving the wrong signals." She described episodes of self-harm, cutting her arms and legs in desperation. She spoke of isolation so profound that she felt she had no one within the palace system she could trust. When Bashir asked if the royal family had offered her support, Diana replied, "No, I don't think anybody knew what to do with me." The palace response was swift and punishing. Within a month, Queen Elizabeth wrote to both Charles and Diana, advising them to divorce. The message was clear. Diana had broken the unwritten compact of royal silence. The divorce was finalized in August 1996. Diana received a settlement of approximately £17 million and lost her designation as Her Royal Highness. That detail, the loss of HRH, would become poignant less than a year later. On August 30th, 1997, Diana was in Paris with Dodi Fayed, with whom she'd been romantically involved for approximately 6 weeks. They dined at the Ritz Hotel and planned to travel to his apartment. The paparazzi presence outside was intense. The decision was made to depart from the back of the hotel. Henri Paul, the deputy head of security at the Ritz, was called back to drive Diana and Dodi in a Mercedes S280. Shortly after midnight on August 31st, they entered the Pont de l'Alma tunnel at high speed. At approximately 12:23 a.m., the Mercedes crashed into the 13th pillar of the tunnel. Dodi Fayed and Henri Paul were killed instantly. Diana sustained massive internal injuries, including a severed pulmonary vein. She died at Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital at 4 a.m. The official investigations, French in 1999, British inquest from 2004 to 2008, determined the crash was caused by Henri Paul's negligent driving. His blood alcohol level was 1.75 grams per liter, more than 3 times the French legal limit. He was traveling at an estimated 65 miles per hour in a 30-mile-per-hour zone, while being pursued by paparazzi vehicles. The British inquest jury returned a verdict of unlawful killing due to grossly negligent driving by Henri Paul and the pursuing paparazzi. Now, I'm going to address something directly because I know some of you are thinking it. Yes, there are questions that persist. It would be intellectually dishonest to pretend they don't exist. The CCTV cameras in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel were reportedly not functioning that night. Of the 17 cameras along the route, 10 weren't working, and the others failed to capture the vehicle clearly. A white Fiat Uno was determined to have been involved in a collision with the Mercedes just before the crash, based on paint traces. But despite searching over 4,000 vehicles, it was never conclusively identified. The route taken was longer than the most direct option. I'm not saying these add up to anything. The official investigations were extensive. But I understand why people still have questions, and pretending those questions don't exist doesn't make them go away. What we know for certain is this. Diana was being chased by paparazzi. Her driver was intoxicated, and the vehicle was traveling at dangerous speed. What followed her death revealed something about how the royal family viewed Diana, and about the British public's relationship with that family. The Queen stayed at Balmoral in Scotland with William and Harry. No public statement for days. The flag at Buckingham Palace didn't fly at half-mast, initially because protocol dictated the royal standard only flew when the monarch was in residence, and the Queen wasn't there. The public was furious. The perception was coldness, indifference. The woman they had loved was gone, and the palace seemed unmoved. Now, and I want to be fair here, there's another way to read what happened. The Queen was a grandmother. Her grandsons, 12 and 15 years old, had just lost their mother. She made the decision to keep them at Balmoral, away from the cameras and the hysteria, to let them grieve privately before they had to perform publicly. The flag issue was protocol, not personal. And the argument that the media pressure was itself a kind of cruelty, demanding public grief from traumatized children and their elderly grandmother, isn't unreasonable. Maybe the Queen was doing what she thought was right for William and Harry. Maybe there was genuine care behind closed doors that we didn't see. Some royal watchers argue exactly this. I'll give you that. I'll give you that interpretation exists and isn't crazy. But here's where I come back to the main point. The royal family's response after Diana's death exists in a context. That context is years of documented isolation. Years of an affair everyone knew about. Years of a system that prioritized Charles's comfort over Diana's survival. You don't get to fail someone for a decade and then expect the benefit of the doubt when she dies. The Queen eventually came to London. She did a walkabout. She gave a broadcast. Public pressure forced the palace to adapt. But the resentment that erupted in that week didn't come from nowhere. It came from all the years before. And where was Camilla during all of this? Invisible, by design. In the immediate aftermath of Diana's death, Camilla became the most hated woman in Britain. The tabloids were merciless. The Rottweiler, they called her. The most hated woman in Britain. Headlines screamed about her stealing Diana's husband, about her being responsible, however indirectly, for Diana's misery. People spat at her car. She couldn't appear in public without risking a mob. Opinion polls showed her approval ratings in single digits. The public had a face for their grief, and it was hers. And this is where Camilla's story truly begins, not as a lover, but as a project. Charles's office understood they had a problem, a massive, potentially monarchy-ending problem. Charles wanted to marry Camilla eventually, but public hostility was astronomical. The Queen Mother, according to multiple biographers, referred to Camilla as that wicked woman and refused to be in the same room with her. Queen Elizabeth herself was reportedly cold, unwilling to acknowledge Camilla's existence in any official capacity. Within the palace, there was genuine fear that Charles's relationship with Camilla could bring down public support for the monarchy itself. So they launched what insiders called Operation PB, PB for Parker Bowles. Mark Boland, Charles's deputy private secretary, became the chief architect of Camilla's rehabilitation. He was young, media-savvy, and willing to play hardball with the press in ways that traditional palace courtiers wouldn't. The strategy was sophisticated and ruthlessly patient. It unfolded in stages over years. First stage, total invisibility. Keep Camilla completely out of sight. No photographs, no public appearances, no acknowledgement of the relationship whatsoever. Let the public anger cool. Let people forget. This lasted through the late 1990s. Camilla essentially disappeared from public life, retreating to her country home while the nation mourned Diana. Second stage, gradual normalization. Carefully orchestrated chance encounters with the press. Strategic placement of stories emphasizing Camilla's good qualities, her warmth, her humor, her devotion to her children and grandchildren. Nothing too sympathetic. Nothing that asked for forgiveness. Just normal. The goal wasn't to make people love her. It was to bore them into acceptance. Boland worked the tabloid editors personally. He understood that the same papers that had savaged Camilla could be brought around, not through confrontation, but through access. Exclusive stories, favorable photo opportunities, tip-offs on other royal news. The currency was information, and Boland spent it strategically. Third stage, the critical milestone. On January 28, 1999, Charles and Camilla made their first public appearance together at a birthday party at the Ritz Hotel in London. Photographers were tipped off in advance. This wasn't an accident. The images went around the world. It was brief, less than a minute walking from the entrance, but it was carefully stage-managed to look casual. Nothing too romantic, just two people leaving a party together. The message? Get used to this. But the rehabilitation wasn't without internal conflict. Boland's aggressive tactics created what the press called the Peppermint War, a reference to a planned television documentary where Charles was filmed sucking a peppermint, which Boland wanted cut for image reasons. The real war was between St. James's Palace, Charles's office, and Buckingham Palace, the Queen's office. Boland was seen as too willing to trade access for favorable coverage, too focused on Charles and Camilla at the expense of the broader royal family. Stories that made Charles look good sometimes made the Queen look bad by comparison. The palace old guard resented his methods. The Queen's own position on Camilla remained frosty for years. In 2000, Camilla met Queen Elizabeth for the first time since the affair became public, at a 60th birthday party for former Greek King Constantine. The meeting was brief and reportedly formal. No warmth, but it happened. Another milestone ticked off the list. Throughout the early 2000s, Camilla began appearing at more events, charity work, agricultural shows. Nothing glamorous, nothing that could be perceived as trying to replace Diana. She dressed conservatively, muted colors, unfussy clothes. She smiled but didn't dazzle. She was, very deliberately, unthreatening. And it worked. Slowly, almost imperceptibly. The tabloids got bored of hating her. Other scandals emerged to consume the public's attention. A generation of young people grew up barely remembering Diana alive. The white-hot fury cooled to resentment, and resentment eventually faded to something like resigned acceptance. By 2005, polls showed that public opposition to a potential marriage had softened from overwhelming to merely divided. It wasn't enthusiasm, it was exhaustion. The British public had simply run out of energy to care. The wedding was announced in February 2005. Charles and Camilla would marry on April 8th at Windsor Castle. A civil ceremony, not a church wedding, because the Church of England's position on divorced persons remarrying was complicated, and Charles was the future supreme governor of that church. The irony of the man who'd committed adultery throughout his first marriage being barred from a church wedding was not lost on anyone. Then complications. Legal questions arose about whether Windsor Castle could host a civil ceremony, since it wasn't licensed for weddings. The venue was changed to Windsor Guildhall, the local town hall. The fairy tale was becoming logistically awkward. The Queen's role was carefully calibrated. She did not attend the civil ceremony itself, only the blessing afterward at St. George's Chapel and the reception. The official explanation was that her presence at a civil ceremony would be complicated, given her role as Supreme Governor of the Church of England. The unofficial reading was that she wasn't going to put her personal stamp of approval on the marriage itself. She'd tolerate it. She wouldn't celebrate it. At the reception, the Queen gave a speech. She compared the day to the Grand National Horse Race, which had been disrupted that year. "They have overcome Beecher's Brook and the chair and all kinds of other terrible obstacles," she said. "They have come through, and I'm very proud and wish them well." It was gracious. It was also notably measured, not exactly a ringing endorsement. Camilla's title was another carefully negotiated compromise. Technically, as the wife of the Prince of Wales, she was entitled to be called Princess of Wales, Diana's title. Obviously, that would never fly. Instead, she was styled as the Duchess of Cornwall. It was understood, though never officially confirmed, that when Charles became king, she would be Queen Consort, rather than simply the Queen. Even that was considered controversial. The years that followed were more of the same. Camilla showing up, being pleasant, not demanding attention. The Rottweiler nickname faded. The hostility cooled to indifference, and indifference gradually warmed to something approaching acceptance. She took on patronages, literacy charities, domestic violence awareness, animal welfare, safe causes, uncontroversial work. She was photographed laughing with Charles, walking the dogs, being a grandmother. The image was ordinary by design. She wasn't trying to be Diana. She was trying to be the opposite of Diana. Steady, boring, comfortable. And the palace made strategic moves to cement her position. In February 2022, as part of her Platinum Jubilee statement, Queen Elizabeth expressed her sincere wish that Camilla would be known as Queen Consort when Charles became king. It was effectively permission. Royal permission to forgive. After decades of careful management, the Queen herself was telling the British public that Camilla was acceptable, legitimate, part of the family. 7 months later, the Queen was dead and Charles was king. And Camilla was beside him. So here's the question I keep coming back to. Did we forgive too easily? Charles never really apologized, not in any meaningful way. He gave that one interview in 1994 where he admitted to adultery, but framed it as happening only after his marriage had irretrievably broken down, which Diana disputed, which the timeline of the Tampon Gate recording, made in December 1989, disputes. The affair was ongoing while Diana was still trying to make the marriage work, while she was still purging in palace bathrooms and cutting herself in desperation. Camilla never apologized either, not publicly, not in any forum where she might be held accountable. She just waited, kept her head down, let Mark Boland and the palace machine do the work, and eventually, the work was done. And now they want us to celebrate it. The love story, the happy ending. Charles got what he wanted. He got Camilla. He got the crown. He got the fairy tale, just delayed by 30 years and one death in a Paris tunnel. Here's what I keep coming back to. Diana was 20 years old when she married Charles. She was a teenager when they got engaged. She entered a system that didn't want her as a person, just as a vessel for heirs and a smiling face for photos. When she struggled, the palace's response was to manage her, not help her. When she spoke out, the palace's response was to punish her. And the whole time, Charles had someone else, someone he loved more. Someone he talked to on the phone about being reincarnated as a tampon while his wife was breaking apart in another room. And Camilla was there for all of it. Willing, present, a phone call away. She knew Diana was suffering. How could she not? Everyone knew. And she stayed anyway. She took those calls. She attended those country house weekends. She wore the pet name Gladys like it was charming rather than vile. Pathetic is the right word for Charles. And what's the word for Camilla? I know some of you will disagree. You'll say it's ancient history, that Charles has proven himself, that Camilla has done good work, that we should move on. And maybe you're right that dwelling on the past serves no purpose. But I also know that if you clicked on this video, you probably haven't forgotten. And maybe you shouldn't. Diana was failed by the man who was supposed to protect her, and by the institution that was supposed to support her. The facts are specific and documented. The quotes are on tape. The timeline is clear. Whatever Charles and Camilla have now, they built it on her suffering. And the PR campaign that rehabilitated them, it was designed to make you forget that. Don't. That's not a love story. That's something else entirely. Subscribe for more stories like this.